The conference hall smelled like ozone and pride. Kovacs stood at the back, his forearms crossed in what humans might call skepticism, watching the newest delegate shuffle toward her assigned seat. She was small, absurdly small, even by human standards, which were already laughable compared to the towering Horthak or the gracefully elongated Morellians who filled the chamber. "Is that a weapon?" Thrin hissed beside him, her chitinous faceplates clicking with barely contained amusement. "Please tell me that pathetic excuse for a civilization didn't just bring wood into the Galactic Security Summit." Kovacs squinted at the object strapped to the human's hip. It was indeed wooden, a sword, if you could dignify it with that term. The scabbard looked hand-carved, etched with symbols that might have meant something to primitive minds, but certainly held no technological value. No plasma core, no molecular edge, no gravitational disruptor field. Just dead plant matter shaped into an archaic stabbing implement. Earth's representative is Mira Kovacs, Kovacs read from his datapad, pronunciation mangling the alien syllables. Former military, multiple citations, currently serves as their primary liaison for off-world conflict resolution. "Conflict resolution," Thrin repeated, her voice dripping with enough sarcasm to corrode steel. "With a wooden stick? How absolutely terrifying." Around them, other delegates had noticed. The Vrin delegation, their scales shimmering with bioluminescent mockery, were already laughing, high-pitched chittering that echoed off the crystalline walls. The Horthak ambassador, massive and tusked, merely snorted, a puff of superheated breath that could have melted flesh at close range. Mira Kovacs appeared completely unaware of the attention. Or perhaps she was aware and simply didn't care. She moved with an economy of motion that Kovacs recognized from his combat analysis training. No wasted movement, no telegraphed intentions. She sat, arranged her primitive paper documents, and waited for the session to begin. "Order?" Chancellor Vex Prime's voice boomed across the chamber, amplified by harmonic resonators embedded in the walls. The Chancellor was Dorothy, a species that resembled ambulatory fungi with delusions of grandeur. "We convene this emergency session to address the Korthian incursion into the neutral zones. The accused stands before us." A platform rose from the floor. On it, surrounded by containment fields that hummed with barely restrained violence, stood General Kovacs. 7 feet of scaled muscle, 4 eyes that glowed with predatory intelligence, and a reputation for brutality that had earned him the nickname the Render across 17 star systems. He smiled, rows of serrated teeth glistening. "The Galactic Council has no authority over Korthian military operations," Kovacs said, his voice a rumble that vibrated through the floor. "Our expansion is justified. Our might is absolute. You sit here, in your comfortable chambers, playing at governance, while warriors like me write history with blood and conquest. The neutral zones are protected by treaty," Vex Prime countered, though Kovacs noticed the Chancellor's spores were turning a sickly pale color. "Fear. Your actions constitute war crimes under 17 separate articles of interstellar law, laws written by the weak, to constrain the strong." Kovacs's laugh was somehow worse than his threats. "I have personally led raids on 47 colonies. I have reduced populations to slaves and resources to ash. What will you do? Send your security forces?" He gestured mockingly at the ceremonial guards lining the walls. "They are decorative, symbolic, as useless as that human's wooden toy." Every eye turned to Mira. She hadn't moved, hadn't reacted. Her face remained calm, almost serene, while an interstellar war criminal had essentially challenged the entire assembled council to do something about his admitted atrocities. "Earth's delegate," Vex Prime said, clearly grasping for any foothold in this rapidly deteriorating situation. "Your species has recently joined the council. You have voting rights on matters of collective security. What is your position on the Korthian matter?" Mira stood. The movement was fluid, controlled. When she spoke, her voice carried, despite having no technological amplification. General Kovacs has confessed to multiple counts of genocide, slavery, and treaty violations, she said, each word precise. Clinical. Under the Council's own charter, he should be taken into custody immediately pending trial. The laughter this time was deafening. Even some of the Morellian delegates, usually dignified to the point of rigidity, were struggling to maintain composure. The human thinks custody is possible, Thrin managed between clicks of mirth. Oh, this is wonderful. Please, tiny mammal, tell us how you plan to enforce this custody. With your wooden sword, perhaps? Kovacs had stopped smiling. His 4 eyes fixed on Mira with the kind of attention a predator reserves for prey that has done something unexpectedly stupid. You dare? His voice had gone quiet. Somehow that was worse than the shouting. You, with your soft flesh and blunt teeth. You, whose species has barely mastered atmospheric flight. You dare to speak of taking me into custody? The law is clear, Mira said. Your guilt is established by your own admission. The sentence requires enforcement. Then, enforce it. Kovacs moved so fast, the containment field screamed in protest. Alarms blared. The field held, but barely. Cracks spiderwebbed across the energy barrier. I challenge you, human. Single combat. Right now. You against me. When I'm done, there won't be enough of you left to identify through genetic sequencing. The chamber went silent. In the history of the Council, combat challenges were rare but legally binding, an archaic tradition maintained because occasionally, very occasionally, they resolved disputes that diplomacy couldn't touch. But they were supposed to be between peers, between warriors of roughly equivalent capability. This wasn't a challenge. It was a public execution. Delegate Kovacs, Vex Prime's voice had gone very small. You are not obligated to accept. We can pursue other legal avenues. How long will those avenues take? Mira asked. Months, perhaps years. And how many more colonies will he destroy in that time? Vex Prime had no answer. I accept the challenge, Mira said. Kovacs found himself leaning forward despite his better judgment. This was insane. Humans were fragile. Their military technology was centuries behind current standards. Their physical capabilities were limited by their inefficient biology and embarrassing lack of natural weapons. This woman was about to die, and she had walked into it with her eyes open. The containment field dropped. Kovacs stepped down, and the platform reconfigured into a combat circle, 20 meters across. Energy barriers rising to contain the violence. Medical drones hovering nearby, already calculating probable injury patterns and preparing trauma protocols that would almost certainly be useless for paste. Mira walked to the opposite side of the circle. Her hand rested on the wooden scabbard. No armor? Kovacs laughed again. No energy shields? No plasma weapons? Just your primitive stick? Just this, Mira agreed. The holographic referee, a construct of pure light and processing power, materialized between them. Combatants ready. Combat begins on my mark. Yield or incapacitation ends the match. Lethal force is permitted. 3, 2, 1. Begin. Kovacs launched himself forward with the kind of speed that had made his species apex predators on a death world where everything evolved to kill. His claws extended, each one coated in molecular edge technology that could slice through starship hull plating. His jaws opened wide enough to bite a human in half. Mira drew her sword. The sound it made coming out of the scabbard was wrong. Not the whisper of wood on wood, but something higher, sharper. A singing note that made Kovacs's sensory organs ache. The blade was not wooden. It was something else entirely. The surface rippled like liquid mercury, but held form like the hardest matter. Light bent around it, creating halos of distorted color. And the edge. Krivex's combat analysis systems were screaming contradictions. The blade appeared to be 1 molecule wide at the cutting surface, but that should be impossible without force field reinforcement. Korthax's charge faltered. Just for a moment. Just long enough for confusion to register on his predatory features. Mira moved. She covered the distance between them in 3 steps, and those steps were wrong too. They ate up space in ways that violated physics. Krivex thought he understood. The first strike came low, impossibly fast, and Korthax's molecular edge claws met the blade with a sound like reality tearing. The claws shattered. All of them. Reduced to glittering fragments that rained onto the combat circle's floor. Korthax roared and swung with his remaining natural claws. Mira wasn't there. She had moved inside his reach, her blade tracing a line across his armored chest that should have been deflected by scales that could withstand ship-grade weaponry. Blood. Bright, green, and steaming. Not deep, but enough to prove the impossible. The chamber had gone absolutely silent. Even the automated systems seemed to have paused in shock. Impossible, Thrin whispered beside Krivex. That's just wood. We saw it. We verified it with scanners. But the scanners had been pointed at the scabbard, at the wooden exterior. Nobody had thought to scan deeper because why would you? Why would anyone disguise advanced technology as primitive materials? What possible strategic advantage could that provide? Krivex understood it now. Watching Mira dance between Korthax's increasingly desperate attacks, it provided the advantage of underestimation. The advantage of opponents who assumed they knew everything about you before the fight even began. Korthax was fast. His species were ambush predators who could accelerate from standstill to lethal velocity in fractions of a second. But Mira was faster in the ways that mattered. She didn't need to match his raw speed. She just needed to be where his attacks weren't, and ensure her blade was where he couldn't avoid it. The second cut took him across the shoulder. Deeper, this time. The third removed a chunk of his tail, which lashed around trying to knock her legs out. The tail hit empty air while the blade opened a line down his left flank. What is that weapon? Korthax bellowed, finally abandoning his attack pattern to leap backward. His regeneration was already working on the wounds, but he was bleeding. He was hurt. For the first time in his career as the Council's worst nightmare, he was on the defensive. Wood, Mira said. Her breathing was elevated but controlled. Hand carved from a tree on my homeworld. The scabbard, anyway. The blade. What is the blade? Oh, this? She held it up, and light scattered through it like liquid rainbow. This is memory. This is every human who ever held a sword and knew they were going to die but fought anyway. This is 4,000 years of metallurgy, materials, science, and quantum engineering, wrapped in a delivery system our ancestors would recognize. This is a promise that we keep to ourselves, that we will never, ever stop improving, that we will take ancient tools and remake them with modern knowledge, that we respect where we came from while reaching for where we're going. She moved again. Korthax tried to counter. His combat programming, honed over decades of warfare, supplied him with the optimal response. Block high, strike low, pivot to create distance for a charging attack. Mira's blade went through his block like it wasn't there. The the molecular thin edge, separated chitin, and scale and muscle with the ease of a laser-cutting smoke. Korthax's right arm, the primary combat limb, fell to the floor. He stared at it, at the cauterized wound, at the impossibility of a human, a weak, fragile nothing from a backwater planet, doing this to him. Yield, Mira said. Not a question, a statement of fact. Korthax reached for his sidearm with his remaining hand. A plasma pistol that could vaporize targets at 50 meters. His fingers closed around the grip. Mira was there, inside his reach again. Her free hand caught his wrist, and something in the way she twisted made a sound like breaking branches. The pistol clattered free. Her blade rested against his throat, the edge dimpling scales that should have been impenetrable. "Yield," she repeated, "or die. Your choice. Make it now." In Kovacs's eyes, Kovacs saw something he never thought he'd witness. The render, the nightmare of 17 systems, the general who had bragged about genocide minutes ago, was afraid. "I yield," Kovacs whispered. The holographic referee materialized instantly. Combat concluded. Victor. Delegate Mira Kovacs, Earth. General Kovacs is remanded to council custody pending trial. Mira sheathed her blade. 5. The singing note reversed, becoming a whisper, then silence. She turned and walked back to her seat, leaving Kovacs kneeling in a pool of his own blood while medical drones swarmed around him. Nobody spoke. The council chamber, which minutes ago had been filled with mockery and laughter, was now so quiet Kovacs could hear his own pulse pounding in his auditory organs. Vex Prime found his voice first. The council recognizes the validity of trial by combat. General Kovacs will be processed according to the appropriate protocols. A pause. This session is adjourned, pending formal charges. Delegates began filing out. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed as they processed what they'd witnessed. A human, a species they'd dismissed as barely worth acknowledging, had just defeated one of the most dangerous warriors in council space with a wooden sword. Except it wasn't wooden, except the scabbard was, except nothing made sense anymore. Kovacs found himself approaching Mira's seat. She was organizing her papers, unconcerned with the chaos around her. "That weapon," he said. "The scabbard really is wood?" "Oak," Mira confirmed. "From Earth. I carved it myself during my military training. Took me 3 months to get it right. But the blade is also from Earth, made from materials we developed over millennia, of making better and better ways to kill each other." She smiled, and it wasn't a cruel expression, just tired. "We're very good at war. We've had a lot of practice. Why disguise it? Why not show its true nature from the start? Because then Kovacs might not have accepted the challenge. He needed to think he was going to win. He needed to be absolutely certain that a human with a wooden sword couldn't possibly be a threat. She stood, gathering her materials. Pride is a universal constant. So is underestimation. Humans learned a long time ago to weaponize both. She walked past him, heading for the exit. Kovacs watched her go. This small mammal who had just rewritten every tactical assessment his people had made about humanity. "Delegate Kovacs," he called after her. "What would you have done if he hadn't accepted the challenge?" She paused at the doorway, turned. Her smile widened slightly. "Then I would have followed proper legal channels, filed the appropriate motions, and waited patiently for justice through bureaucracy. Because we're also very good at that, when we need to be. But the sword is always a backup plan. We hope we never need it. We sharpen it anyway, just in case." She left. The door closed behind her with a soft hiss of pneumatics. Thrin approached, her chitinous plates still slightly discolored with shock. "That changes everything. If humans can produce warriors like that, weapons like that, while pretending to be primitive, it doesn't change everything," Kovacs said slowly, his forearms gesturing in patterns of calculation. "It just means we need to recalibrate our understanding of what humanity actually is versus what they've allowed us to believe they are." "A wooden sword," Thrin said again, as if repetition might make it make sense. "They brought a wooden sword to a galactic security summit." "No," Kovacs corrected. "They brought a lesson. About assumptions. About underestimation. About the danger of judging a species by their exterior rather than their capability." He looked at the combat circle, where cleaning drones were already removing the evidence of Kovacs's humiliation. "We laughed at them. At her. At that weapon. We thought we knew what we were seeing. What were we actually seeing? A predator that learned long ago how to look like prey. 3 solar cycles after the incident with Kovacs, the council chamber had become a very different place. Delegates who once lounged in their seats now sat with rigid attention. The Vryn no longer chittered mockingly at anyone. The Horthak ambassador had actually apologized to the human delegation for his earlier dismissiveness, which was apparently the first apology his species had issued in 4 centuries. Mira Kovacs still wore the wooden scabbard. Kovacs had done his research in the intervening time. Earth's military history was a nightmare document of continuous warfare spanning their entire recorded civilization. They had invented thousands of ways to kill each other, refined them, discarded them for better methods, then sometimes circled back to old techniques because they still worked. The wooden sword was just the visible symbol of something far more terrifying. Humans never stopped preparing for the next fight. Today's session was supposed to be routine. Trade negotiations between the Peltharan Consortium and the Outer Rim, collectives. Boring numbers and percentages that usually put half the chamber to sleep. Instead, the doors exploded inward, not metaphorically. Actual explosions. Shaped charges that turned reinforced alloy into shrapnel and smoke. The ceremonial guards dropped instantly, their decorative armor providing exactly as much protection as Kovacs had suggested. None. Through the smoke came soldiers. 20 of them. Maybe 30. Heavy combat armor painted in colors that matched no registered faction. Weapons that Kovacs's tactical systems identified as Gorvath military hardware, which was concerning because the Gorvath were supposed to be a peaceful mining collective, not arms manufacturers. "Nobody move!" The lead soldier's voice came through helmet speakers, distorted and amplified. "This chamber is now under the control of the Liberation Front. You will comply, or you will die, starting with the weakest among you." His weapon swung toward the human delegation. Mira hadn't moved from her seat. Her hands remained visible, resting on the table in front of her. But Kovacs noticed her weight had shifted. Minutely, almost imperceptibly, her center of gravity had lowered by perhaps 2 centimeters. "The Liberation Front," Vex Prime said, his spores turning colors Kovacs had never seen before, probably cycling through their entire species' fear spectrum. "You're extremists, terrorists. You were disbanded after the Helios Accords. We regrouped. We evolved. And we're done watching this council pretend to govern while species like humanity corrupt everything we've built." The lead soldier took 3 steps closer to Mira. "Your kind doesn't belong here. Primitive warmongers playing at civilization. We're going to broadcast your execution across every system. Show the galaxy what happens to upstarts who forget their place." "That seems inefficient," Mira said. Her voice was conversational, calm, like she was discussing weather patterns instead of her imminent murder. "If you wanted to make a statement, you should have started with Chancellor Vex Prime. Higher symbolic value. Better visuals for your broadcast. Killing me first is tactically questionable." The soldier paused. Behind his helmet, Kovacs imagined confusion warring with rage. "Are you giving me advice on how to execute you?" "I'm giving you advice on propaganda strategy. If you're going to commit terrorism, at least be competent about it." She tilted her head slightly. "Although I notice your team's positioning is suboptimal. 3 of your soldiers are in each other's firing lines. 2 more have their backs to potential ambush points. And your leader, that's you, is standing exactly where a close-quarters fighter would want you. Within striking distance but outside your peripheral vision's effective range." "Shut up!" The soldier's weapon came up, aimed directly at her head. "You think your wooden sword trick will save you? We watched the footage. We analyzed it. That blade might cut through personal armor, but it won't do anything against 20 rifles firing simultaneously." "Probably not," Mira agreed. "Of course, you're assuming I only have one trick." She moved, Kovacs had studied the combat footage from her fight with Korthax dozens of times, slowing it down to frame-by-frame analysis. He thought he understood how fast humans could move when properly trained and motivated. He had been wrong. Mira covered the 3 meters between her seat and the lead soldier in less time than Kovacs's combat computer could calculate. Her hand struck the rifle, redirecting it upward just as the soldier fired. The plasma bolt scorched the ceiling. Her other hand did something to his helmet that made a sound like cracking eggs. And suddenly, the soldier was stumbling backward, his visual systems compromised. The wooden scabbard was in her hands. She hadn't drawn the blade. She was using the sheath itself as a weapon, spinning it in patterns that seemed more like art than combat. It caught one soldier across the helmet hard enough to dent armor plating, reversed direction, and struck another in the knee joint, collapsing his leg. "Fire! Fire! Kill her!" Someone was shouting. Multiple someones. 20 rifles opened up simultaneously. Plasma bolts turned the air into superheated hell. The energy barriers around the chamber were never designed for this kind of abuse. They flickered, failed in sections, and delegates screamed as stray shots came uncomfortably close. Mira wasn't where the shots were aimed. She had moved behind the lead soldier, using him as a shield, and his own team's fire cut him down. She released his body, letting it fall, and threw the wooden scabbard like a spear. It hit another soldier in the chest with enough force to crack his sternum through military-grade armor. He went down, gasping. Now she drew the blade. That singing sound again, that note that made reality uncomfortable. The sword emerged from empty air where she'd thrown the scabbard, materializing in her grip like it had always been there, like the laws of physics were negotiable when it came to human weapons technology. "Scanning!" one of the soldiers shouted. "The blade is reading as multiple quantum states simultaneously. It's phasing between dimensional frequencies." "Shoot her anyway," they tried. Kovacs watched plasma bolts pass through the space Mira occupied, except she was simultaneously occupying different space, moving in ways that suggested her combat suit, invisible beneath her diplomatic clothing, was providing enhancements that made mockery of standard kinematics. The blade sang through armor, through weapons, through the confidence of soldiers who had thought this would be an easy massacre. 5 down. 7. 10. The remaining soldiers began backing toward the destroyed entrance. Their formation had collapsed entirely. These were trained fighters, probably veterans of actual combat, and they were retreating from a single human with a sword. "This isn't possible!" one of them screamed. "You're just mammals! You're supposed to be weak." "We are weak," Mira said, and her blade took his rifle in half, then his arm at the elbow. "Compared to most species here, we're fragile, slow, and absurdly limited. So we compensate. We train harder. We engineer better. We refuse to accept limitations as permanent conditions." Another soldier lunged at her with a vibro blade, the kind of weapon designed for cutting through starship bulkheads. Mira's sword met it edge to edge, and the vibro blade's molecular oscillation field collapsed. The weapon shattered into components that had never been designed to exist separately. "We also cheat," she added, extensively and without remorse. The last 5 soldiers broke and ran, just abandoned their weapons and fled through the smoking doorway. Mira let them go, standing in the center of carnage that would require significant cleanup and probably counseling for witnesses. She was breathing hard now, not exhausted, but definitely elevated. A thin line of blood ran down her left arm, where someone had gotten lucky with a grazing shot. "Medical drones?" Vex Prime's voice was shaking. "We need medical drones for the wounded. And security. Real security. And someone explained to me how terrorists breached Council security with enough hardware to start a small war. The Gorvath have been manufacturing weapons illegally for 18 months, Mira said, sheathing her blade. That singing note again, descending into silence. Selling to extremist groups across 7 sectors. I submitted a report about it 6 weeks ago. Apparently, it got lost in committee. Kovacs pulled up his records. She was right. There it was. A detailed intelligence analysis from Earth's observation networks, complete with evidence and recommended actions. It had been filed under low-priority items because, well, it came from humans. The new species, the primitives, with wooden swords. How did you know? Thrin asked. She had taken cover under her desk during the fighting, which Kovacs couldn't fault her for. He had done the same. How did Earth's intelligence services discover this when our own security apparatus missed it? We didn't miss anything, Mira said. We just paid attention differently. Humans are paranoid. It's a survival trait. We assume everyone is potentially hostile until proven otherwise, and sometimes even after that. So, we watch, we listen, we collect data that other species dismiss as irrelevant noise. She walked to one of the downed soldiers and removed his helmet. The face beneath was Peltheron, one of the species currently negotiating trade agreements, or supposedly negotiating while actually planning terrorism. The Liberation Front recruited from inside established delegations, Mira continued. They used legitimate credentials to bypass security. They smuggled weapons in component form over several months, assembling them in maintenance areas, and they chose today because the Peltheron trade negotiations provided cover for increased staff presence. You knew this was coming, Kovacs said. It wasn't a question. We suspected. The timing was too convenient, the political rhetoric too escalated, the weapons shipments too precisely coordinated. She looked at him directly. So, I prepared. Made sure I was carrying appropriate equipment. Positioned myself where I could respond quickly. Hoped I was wrong, but planned like I was right. You used yourself as bait, Vex Prime said. I used myself as a deterrent that failed to deter, which meant transitioning to a response protocol. She touched her wounded arm, checking the damage. The blade can phase through most matter selectively. The scabbard contains a quantum entanglement link, so I can recall the sword regardless of physical separation. My suit provides enhanced mobility and limited protection. Standard diplomatic loadout for human representatives. Standard, Thrin repeated. You consider quantum phasing weapons and combat enhancement suits standard diplomatic equipment. After what happened with Kovacs, did you think we'd show up unprepared for subsequent threats? Mira smiled, and it was almost friendly. We learned that lesson about 3,000 years ago. Be polite, be professional, but have a plan to fight everyone you meet. Security forces were finally arriving. Actual combat-trained personnel with proper equipment, looking embarrassed that a single delegate had handled a threat they should have prevented. They began securing the wounded attackers and checking for additional threats. Kovacs approached Mira while medical drones fussed over her arm. Your report, the one that got ignored. What else was in it? 7 other potential security concerns. 3 active espionage operations, 2 assassination plots against various delegates, and a recommendation that Council security protocols be completely overhauled because they're essentially decorative. She winced as a drone sealed her wound with biofoam. Earth has been a spacefaring species for less than a century. We've been surviving each other for much longer. The skills transfer. We underestimated you, Kovacs said. Again? Yes. Will we ever stop underestimating you? Mira considered that question seriously. Probably not. It's statistically unlikely that species with longer histories and more advanced technology will suddenly start taking warnings from relative newcomers seriously. Cognitive bias is universal. So, we plan around it. We prepare for the moment when underestimation becomes a critical mistake, and we're ready to compensate when that moment arrives. That's exhausting. Being human usually is. She accepted a clean jacket from an aide, shrugging into it carefully. The wooden scabbard remained visible at her hip. But the alternative is extinction, so we stay tired. Chancellor Vex Prime approached, his spores cycling through colors that Krivex's translator suggested meant profound gratitude mixed with existential uncertainty. Delegate Kovacs. On behalf of the Council, I thank you for your intervention. You saved many lives today. Just doing my job, Chancellor. Your job is diplomatic relations, not counter-terrorism operations. On Earth, those are often the same thing. She paused. Permission to speak bluntly? After what you just did, you have permission to speak however you want. This won't be the last attack. The Liberation Front has cells in at least 12 systems. They have funding, weapons, and motivation. Killing a few soldiers today doesn't eliminate the organization. It just makes them angrier and more desperate. Mira looked around the chamber at the delegates who were slowly emerging from cover. The Council needs to decide whether it's actually going to enforce its own rules or whether it's just going to keep being a discussion forum while extremists do whatever they want. And what would you suggest? Form A. Real security force. Not ceremonial guards, actual combat-trained personnel. Integrate intelligence services from member species instead of letting everyone keep secrets. And maybe, possibly, occasionally listen when a member species submits a report saying something bad is about to happen. Vex Prime's spores went through several colors that didn't translate. You're asking us to militarize the Council. I'm asking you to acknowledge that the galaxy has threats that require more than strongly worded resolutions. You've been peaceful so long you forgot that peace requires maintenance. She gestured at the destroyed entrance, the scorch marks, the wounded. This is what happens when maintenance gets deferred. We'll take your recommendations under advisement. Of course you will. And they'll go into committee and get debated and eventually implemented 5 years after the next crisis makes them obviously necessary. Mira shrugged. Humans will keep submitting reports. Keep preparing for threats you ignore. Keep carrying wooden swords that aren't actually wooden. And when something goes wrong, we'll handle it, because that's apparently our role here. She walked toward the exit, medical drones still hovering around her like concerned insects. Kovacs followed. You're not angry? About being ignored? About having to fight alone? Anger is inefficient, Mira said. We were ignored because we're new, unknown, and apparently primitive. That's predictable behavior. Getting angry about predictable behavior is like getting angry at gravity. Better to just account for it and move on. The other delegates will treat you differently now. They treated me differently after Korthax. That lasted about 3 weeks before everyone decided it was a fluke. This will last maybe a month before they convince themselves it was luck or exaggeration. She stopped at the doorway. But that's fine. We don't need respect. We just need to survive long enough to earn it, properly. How long will that take? Based on galactic history? Probably another few centuries? She smiled. Good thing humans are patient when we need to be. She left. The wooden scabbard bumped against her hip with each step, a reminder that appearances were weapons and underestimation was a strategic resource. Kovacs remained in the chamber, watching cleanup crews repair the damage. Around him, delegates were talking in hushed tones about the human delegate who had single-handedly defeated a terrorist assault, about her impossible sword and her casual competence in the face of lethal danger. Thrin approached, her chitinous plates still slightly pale. They're saying she's exceptional, an outlier, that most humans couldn't do what she does. Maybe, Kovacs said, or maybe she's exactly what humans become when they have 4,000 years of practice surviving themselves. He pulled up Earth's diplomatic roster, 53 representatives across various council committees and subcommittees. I think we should review all of their files, see what other surprises they're carrying. You think they're all armed like her? I think humans don't send anyone anywhere without preparation for the worst possible outcome. It's who they are. He highlighted another name, Marcus Webb, assigned to the Technology Integration Committee. His file listed his background as academic research, but there was a gap in his service history. 5 years unaccounted for. They're all carrying something. Maybe not quantum-phasing swords, but something, because they assume they'll need it. That's paranoid. That's survival instinct refined over millennia of killing each other. Kovacs closed the files. And now they're here, among us. Still paranoid. Still preparing. Still carrying wooden swords that cut through everything. In the distance, alarms were still sounding. Security was still scrambling. The council was still trying to process what had happened. And somewhere in human delegation quarters, Mira Kovacs was probably filing another report that would be ignored until it became urgently, desperately relevant. Kovacs made a note to actually read the next one, just in case. Because, if today had taught him anything, it was that when humans warned you about something, they had probably already lived through worse and were being polite by not saying so directly. The wooden sword hung on his mind, a symbol wrapped in misdirection, wrapped in lethality. It was the most human thing he had ever encountered. Beautiful, terrifying, and absolutely impossible to ignore once you understood what you were actually looking at.